Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. This is Dirt Bike Channel. I'm your host Kyle Brotherson, and today we're going to start a video series where I'm going to talk about what I do to my bikes as I set them up. Now this is going to have to be a multi-part video because once I started laying this stuff down in the timeline, I realized I had at least 3 videos worth of content, and essentially what we're going to do is go through my process of setting up a new bike. Over the last 10 years, I've done this over 40 times on the big bikes that I ride, and if you take into account the bikes that I help friends set up and my kids' bikes, I've done this over 60 times. I've just completed it here on this Kawasaki, and I've also just barely completed it on this 2021 KTM, and I want to show you guys how this process works and what I go through on each one of my bikes. The other thing I want to mention is that this is kind of an evolving list that I have. I keep adding things to this, I keep taking it away, and I don't do every single one of these things to every single one of my bikes. I kind of tailor it to what I'm going to do with the bike. If I don't think the bike is going to take me a million miles from nowhere, maybe I don't do some of these things. If I'm only going to have the bike for 15 or 20 hours and I'm not going to take it into extreme enduro environments, maybe I won't put as many protection parts on it, or maybe I won't put this type of handguard on it or something like this. So I tailor it to the bike and what my purpose for using that bike is. If you're just going out there and using your bike as a track bike or something, maybe some of these things are not going to apply to you. But if you're going to go take your bike way out into the boonies and it's going to be your lifeline 50 miles from nowhere, you might want to do more of these protection items and more of these like insurance items that I have. So it doesn't matter if you're Kawasaki, Yamaha, Honda, Beta, Sherco, Gas, KTM, Husqvarna. What matters is what you're going to do with the bike. And these things that we're going to talk about in these setup videos and these protection videos are a good primer for you to think about how you might want to protect and set up your bike. So this is my list as of right now. November 13th is when I'm filming this video, and subject to change in the future. I may add things, but I've got over 60 things we're going to talk about in this video series, so do not go anywhere. I'm going to go through and set all my clickers to a standard position. I'm talking about high speed and low speed compression, your rebound, and then on the forks as well, rebound and compression. Get all those things in kind of the standard configuration as a baseline. I'm going to go around and check bolts everywhere, all over the bike. This bolt was just one that I put back in and put some Loctite on it. You'd be shocked how often you'll find something that isn't tight. Now these seem to be okay. Obviously you want to have a torque wrench in some of the special areas. You can refer to your manual. I kind of have a little bit of an idea how a lot of these bolts should be torqued down. And so most of it is just common sense. You don't want them too tight, but I'm going to go around and put just torque everything all the way across the bike. It's a good idea to run the bike for just a few minutes and then look for any leaking gaskets, any oil leaking out of any of the gaskets anywhere on the bike, and just make sure that you don't have any major problems like that. Here's a little trick with air forks. That air chuck, if you move your handlebars forward, it makes it really hard to get to that air chuck. So I'm going to loosen these bolts and spin this around so that that chuck is coming out backwards. See that? Now that the air chuck is coming backwards, it's much easier to get the gauge on that. Of course, once you've turned this around, you want to make sure this is still the same exact height as it is on the other side and that your axle is not on a bind. Hey, just super quick though, if you're watching this video before December 15th of 2020, there are 3 bikes right here which I will be giving away to you. If you go to my website, dirtbikechannel.com, you can get entered to win the Sherco and the 2 2020 KTMs. I don't know what you're waiting for, so head over to my website, dirtbikechannel.com, right now to get entered to win those bikes. Okay, let's get into the video. One of the places that I definitely want to use a torque wrench is on my triple clamp. So this top mount on a KTM is supposed to be 17 Newton meters. This bottom one is only supposed to be 12. I'm going to go ahead and see what my torque wrench is set to and make sure I've got 17 Newton meters on both of those. Just go slow, torque them evenly. Every bike might be a little bit different, but generally speaking, these middle clamps, lower clamps, are going to be a lower torque spec than the top, so don't mix that up. While I've got my front wheel off, I can check to see if my forks are binding up at all or if they're in alignment by actually just taking my tire off and seeing if my axle will spin here. See how easily that spins? If that doesn't spin easily, that means these things are not the same height and you need to adjust them and get them back into spec so that this isn't binding, because you want this fork to be able to free float. That's a good sign. You can also just check to see how much above the triple clamps your fork is. And you want that the same on both forks, but you'll be able to see down below exactly if it's bound up by checking that, doing that axle test. Often overlooked is just checking your rider sag, which is how much you're compressing the bike down under your own weight. I've got videos that show you how to do that, but it's a critical part of the overall new bike checklist. Whether it's new to you or just a used bike that you gotta set the sag. Let's talk about tubes for a second. When your bike comes from the factory, it's gonna have a really thin tube like this one in the tire. Those can get flats easily. I would recommend replacing with a heavy duty tube if you're gonna stay with tubes. That might save your bacon. The other thing you could do is you could install tubeless like this one. This is what I typically do. Or you could run moose bibs. So the point is, the tube that's going to be in your bike when you first get it is probably not the best, and you could either upgrade to heavy duty tube, tubeless, or moose bibs. And then for most of my bikes, I don't use the stock tires, especially if I'm going to review them, so I'll put a new front and rear tire on the bike that I know and trust. It's important to check your chain tension. This might be too loose or too tight. There's a spec in your manual. You'll be adjusting it using these axle block adjusters right back here, but check the tension on your chain. You need to check your head bearing tension. That is how hard it is to turn the wheel or turn the bars. You don't want it too loose, but you don't want it too tight. You can adjust that by typically loosening the top bolts on the triple clamp on both sides and then loosening this bolt, and then you can put pressure or adjust the tension with that center bolt right there, but that's important to get dialed in. This one is just a little bit tighter. This is kind of how I want it, where it will not flop from side to side unless I give it just a little bit of a nudge. See, it won't fall on its own, but it'll fall over if I just barely nudge it. That's how I like my head bearing tension to be adjusted. You'd be surprised how often you get a loose spoke on a bike when it's brand new. So I just go around with a spoke wrench and I'll tighten anything down. I'll look for loose ones and tighten anything that is loose while trying not to take the rim completely out of true, but you can just go through and make sure you're not going to lose one of these spokes. Install some handguards. Typically the KTMs and the Shirkos will come with handguards, but this Kawasaki over here does not have any handguards, so I'm going to have to go ahead and install some on there. Sometimes I'll install a full wrap handguard like I have on this bike. Sometimes I just use a flag style, but it is super nice to have a handguard on the bike. If I'm not doing a full wrap handguard, I will take and move my levers in and put Teflon tape underneath the perches to allow them to spin a little bit more freely so I don't break levers. What's behind curtain number one? Well, among other things, a couple of carburetors here. One of the things that you'll need to do when you first get your bike is to jet your carburetor if it runs a carburetor. So this is a McCuney. This one is Electron. If you run Electron, it'll probably be a little easier to tune. If you're running a McCuney or a Keyin or something like that, it's vitally important that you set your carburetor up for the density altitude that you're going to be riding at. You may need to take your needle out and put a new needle in, maybe a main jet, maybe even an idle jet. But jetting the carburetor is going to be critical, 4-stroke or 2-stroke, to get it running right. So while certainly not every TPI bike I've ever had needed this idle screw to be taken out, KTM glues this little idle screw down inside here, and you have to heat this up with a torch to get that out. So I took that out yesterday, and then I got this Slavin's idle screw here. And while certainly not every single bike needs this, I do think that this is a good thing to put in your bike to make it run properly and make it idle properly so it's not too lean. I have videos on this, but essentially we're just putting this screw in here so we can adjust the idle independent of this air bypass screw here. I'm going to turn this air bypass screw all the way basically closed, maybe open it up a quarter turn to start off. But I'm taking this idle screw out, or putting this idle screw in on most of my TPI bikes now. We got to get our idle set. On every bike it's going to be a little bit different. On this Kawasaki it's right under here, and you'll need to have the bike completely warmed up in order to do this. So a lot of times I'll set my idle out on my very first ride. Make sure if you have to take a screwdriver with you, you've got that, but you want to set the bike up so it'll idle and not die. And the only way that happens is after the bike is fully warm. Pretty much all the newer KTMs are coming with hour meters installed from the factory, but if it doesn't have an hour meter, I'll put one on. Here's an example of one that I installed just on the KX. I haven't run the bike since I installed that. In fact, I haven't ridden it, but this is something that I'll put on the bike right away if possible, if it doesn't have one on the bike already. Pretty easy. You just run the wires down, and I don't know how well you can see that, but you just run those little wires around, wrap it around your spark plug wire or a coil wire, and you're good to go there. Thanks for watching part 1 of my video series on my new bike setup. I'm gonna have part 2 come out on this where we'll continue the actual setup process for these bikes. And then there will be a third video also that follows where I go through a lot of the protection parts that I put on these bikes. This whole process takes me between, anywhere between 3 hours to 12 hours on the bikes, depending on how many things I do to them. So anyway, just wanted to thank you guys. Please support Dirt Bike Channel by using the links to Rocky Mountain ATV down in the video description or over on my website, dirtbikechannel.com. You can click up in the upper right-hand corner. There's a links section there and that would help to support me. And every once in a while we do dirt bike sweepstakes where I give away dirt bikes. This will be a bike that I give away next year. I'm giving away 3 bikes that are over there. So stay tuned for those things. And I think that's what I've got for you guys. Until next time, leave a single track. Thanks.